In a small Nigerian village, surrounded by tall palm trees and dusty roads, lived a young girl named Nneka. At just 14 years old, her life changed forever. Her uncle, one of the richest men in the village, owned a large compound where Nneka often visited. One hot afternoon, Nneka was walking through the compound when the gatekeeper approached her. He was an older man with a deep, scratchy voice and calloused hands. "Nneka, come here," he called out. "I need your help with something." Nneka hesitated, feeling uneasy. "What is it, sir?" she asked timidly. "Just come inside for a moment," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Nneka reluctantly followed him, her heart racing. As they entered a small room, the gatekeeper's demeanor changed. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "You're a pretty young thing, aren't you?" he growled, reaching for her. Nneka tried to back away, her voice trembling. "Please, I should go. My uncle will be looking for me." But the gatekeeper didn't listen. He grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her closer. "Your uncle won't be back for hours," he sneered. Nneka's pleas fell on deaf ears as the gatekeeper took advantage of her youth and vulnerability. When it was over, he threatened her to keep quiet. As weeks passed, Nneka's fear and confusion grew. She noticed changes in her body and realized she was pregnant. The thought of facing her uncle or the gatekeeper filled her with dread. One evening, as she lay on her bed, Nneka overheard her uncle talking to a neighbor. "That girl has been acting strange lately," her uncle said. "I wonder what's wrong with her." The neighbor replied, "Maybe she's sick. Have you taken her to the doctor?" Nneka's heart raced. She knew she couldn't hide her condition much longer. That night, she made a decision. As the house fell quiet, Nneka grabbed a small bag and stuffed it with some clothes and food. Her hands shook as she opened her bedroom door, peering into the dark hallway. "I have to leave," she whispered to herself. "I can't stay here anymore." Carefully, she tiptoed through the house, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. When she reached the front door, she paused, her hand on the handle. "Goodbye," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. Then she was outside, running as fast as she could. The night was pitch black, and Nneka stumbled over rocks and roots. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. She ran for hours, not knowing where she was going. When the sun began to rise, Nneka found herself in a village she didn't recognize. Exhausted and scared, she collapsed under a tree. "Where am I?" she wondered, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings. A woman passing by noticed her. "Are you lost, child?" she asked. Nneka nodded, too tired to speak. She had escaped, but now she faced a new challenge, surviving on her own in a strange place. After meeting the old woman, Nneka spent a few days recovering from her journey, but she knew she couldn't stay there long. She needed a place where no one would ask questions as her pregnancy becomes visible. One day, while walking through the village, Nneka spotted an unfinished building on the outskirts. It was just a shell, with some walls up but no roof. Most people avoided it, but to Nneka, it looked like a perfect hiding place. That night, she snuck into the building, carrying her small bag of belongings. The floor was hard and dusty, but it was better than sleeping outside. "This will do," Nneka whispered to herself, setting up a small area in a corner. The next morning, Nneka woke up early, determined to find work. She did all kinds of jobs, washing of people's clothes, plates, and working in the farm. Nneka worked all day, her hands raw from scrubbing. At the end, she was given a small amount of money and some leftover food. Over the next few weeks, Nneka took on any job she could find. She washed clothes, cleaned houses, and even worked in the farms under the hot sun. Her pregnancy made the work harder, but she pushed through the fatigue and nausea. One day, while working in a farm, Nneka felt dizzy and had to sit down. The farm owner, a kind-looking man, noticed her distress. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern in his voice. Nneka nodded weakly. "Yes, sir. Just a little tired. I'll get back to work now." The man shook his head. "No, you need rest. Are you eating enough?" Nneka couldn't hold back her tears. "I'm trying, sir, but it's hard." The man's expression softened. "Where are you staying?" Nneka hesitated, then told him about the unfinished building. The man looked shocked. "That's no place for anyone to live. Especially not in your condition," he said. "Listen, I have an old shed behind my house. It's not much, but it's better than that building. You can stay there if you want." Nneka was overwhelmed by his kindness. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Despite the man's offer, Nneka decided to stay in the unfinished building. It felt safer, more hidden. She used some of her earnings to buy an old mattress and a blanket, making her corner a bit more comfortable. As her pregnancy progressed, Nneka worked even harder. She knew she needed to save money for when the baby came. Every night she would return to the building, exhausted but determined. "We'll be okay," she would whisper, rubbing her growing belly. "I'll take care of you." The unfinished building became more than just a shelter. It was the only place where Nneka felt safe enough to let her guard down, to cry when things got too hard, and to talk to her unborn child about her hopes and fears. Despite the difficulties, Nneka found a strange comfort in her new life. Here, no one knew her past. Here, she could be whoever she wanted to be. And most importantly, here she could protect her baby from the world that had been so cruel to her. One hot afternoon, Nneka felt a sharp pain in her belly. She knew it was time. Alone in the uncompleted building, she laid down on her worn mattress, fear gripping her heart. "Oh no, not now," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm not ready." The labor pains intensified, and Nneka bit her lip to keep from screaming. She didn't want anyone to hear her. Hours passed, and the pain became unbearable. "Please, God, help me," she prayed, tears streaming down her face. As night fell, the cold air seeped through the unfinished walls. Nneka shivered, her body covered in sweat. She felt scared and alone. Finally, with one last push, her baby was born. Exhausted and dizzy, Nneka reached for her child, but in her weakened state, her hand slipped. "No," she cried as she accidentally knocked the baby against a piece of broken concrete. The baby let out a loud wail. Nneka, horrified, quickly picked him up. She saw a mark on his forehead where he had hit the concrete. "I'm so sorry, my baby," she sobbed, cradling him close. "Mama didn't mean to hurt you." She examined the mark, her heart heavy with guilt. It was red and swollen, sure to leave a scar. As she held her crying son, Nneka felt a mix of love and sadness. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, gently rocking him. "Mama's here." After a while, the baby calmed down. Nneka looked at his tiny face and felt a surge of love. "I'll name you Emeka," she said softly. "It means God has done well. You're strong, my son. You'll need to be strong in this world." Exhausted but relieved, Nneka held Emeka close, vowing to protect him no matter what. One morning, Nneka woke up to find she had no food left for herself or Emeka. She looked at her sleeping baby, worry creasing her forehead. "I need to get us something to eat," she murmured. "I'll be quick, I promise." Carefully, she placed Emeka on the mattress, surrounding him with blankets. "Stay safe, my little one. Mama will be back soon." Nneka stepped out of the building, her eyes scanning the area cautiously. The dusty path stretched before her, leading to the village center. As she walked, her mind raced with worries. "How will I keep feeding him? What if he gets sick?" she thought, her heart heavy. Unknown to Nneka, a pair of eyes watched her from behind a nearby house. Mama Yuch, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, had been observing Nneka for days. "There she goes again," Mama Yuch whispered to herself, leaving that poor baby all alone. Mama Yuch was well known in the village, but not for good reasons. People whispered about her when she passed by. "That's the woman who takes babies," they'd say. "She sells them to rich people who can't have children." As Nneka disappeared down the path, Mama Yush stepped out from her hiding place. She looked at the uncompleted building, her eyes narrowing. "It's not right for a baby to live like that," she muttered. "I could find him a good home, with people who can take care of him properly." She took a step towards the building, then hesitated. "But is it really my place to interfere?" she wondered aloud. For a moment, Mama Yuch stood there, torn between her usual practices and a flicker of doubt. Finally, she made her decision and moved towards the building where baby Emeka lay sleeping, unaware of the danger approaching. For weeks, Mama Yuch had been watching Nneka and her baby. She often stood in the shadows, observing the young mother's struggles. "Poor girl," Mama Yuch would mutter to herself. "She can barely feed herself, let alone a baby." One day, as Nneka was out of sight, Mama Yuch made her move. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then quickly walked to the uncompleted building. "This is for the best," she whispered, trying to convince herself. Inside, she found Emeka lying on the old mattress. The baby stirred as she approached. "Shh, little one," Mama Yuch cooed, gently picking him up. "You're going to a better place." Emeka started to cry, and Mama Yuch nervously looked around. "Quiet now," she said, rocking him. We need to leave quickly." She wrapped Emeka in a clean blanket she had brought and hurried out of the building. Her heart was racing as she walked briskly towards her home. Once inside, Mama Yuch called out, "Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, are you here?" A well-dressed couple emerged from another room. Mrs. Okoro gasped when she saw the baby. "Is that him?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Mama Yuch nodded. "Yes, this is the baby I told you about." Mr. Okoro stepped forward, his face serious. "And you're sure the mother won't come looking for him?" "She's just a young girl," Mama Yuch assured them. "She can't take care of him properly. You're doing her a favor, really." Miss Okoro reached for Emeka, tears in her eyes. "He's beautiful," she whispered. As the couple fussed over the baby, Mama Yuch felt a twinge of guilt, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the envelope of money Mr. Okoro was holding out to her. "Remember," Mama Yuch said firmly, "no one can know where he came from. As far as anyone knows, he's your child now." The Okoros nodded solemnly, too engrossed with Emeka to fully register her words. When Nneka returned back to the uncompleted building, her heart felt relieved that she could now feed Emeka. "Emeka, Mama's back," she called out as she entered, but there was no sound of a baby crying. Nneka's heart started to beat faster. "Emeka," she called again, louder this time. She rushed to the corner where she had left him. The blankets were there, but no Emeka. Panic set in. No, Nneka muttered, searching frantically. She looked under the mattress, behind the piles of bricks, in every corner of the building. "Emeka, where are you?" Tears started streaming down her face as the horrible truth sank in. Her baby was gone. Nneka ran out of the building, looking up and down the street. "Help," she screamed. "Someone took my baby." A few people came out of their houses, looking confused. "What's wrong?" an old woman asked. "My baby," Nneka sobbed. "He's gone. Someone took him." The next few days were a blur of panic and desperation. Nneka went from house to house, knocking on doors. "Please," she begged at each house. "Have you seen a baby boy? He has a mark on his forehead," she asked, but no one saw him. As days turned into weeks, Nneka didn't give up. She barely ate or slept. Her eyes were red and swollen from constant crying. One day, she approached a group of women washing clothes. "Excuse me," Nneka said, her voice trembling. "I'm looking for my baby. He's been missing for weeks now." The women exchanged glances. One of them spoke up. "Girl, maybe it's time to accept that he's gone." "No," Nneka cried. "I can't give up. He's all I have." Another woman patted her shoulder. "Sometimes bad things happen. You're young. You can have another baby." Nneka pulled away, anger flashing in her eyes. "I don't want another baby. I want my Emeka." As she walked away, she heard the women whispering. "Poor thing," one said. "She's lost her mind with grief." But Nneka didn't care what they thought. She would search for Emeka until her last breath if she had to. Her heart felt like it was breaking every day, but she couldn't stop. Somewhere out there, her baby needed her, and she would find him no matter what. Mr. and Mrs. Okoro had been married for 25 years. They lived in a big house and had lots of money from their successful businesses. But there was one thing they wanted more than anything else: a child of their own. As they reached their mansion, they sat down and talked about the name for the baby. "What should we name him?" Mr. Okoro asked. "How about Donald?" Mrs. Okoro suggested. "After your father." Mr. Okoro smiled. "Donald it is." Over the next few weeks, the Okoro's house was filled with joy. They bought everything Donald could need and more. "Look at this little outfit," Mrs. Okoro cooed, holding up a tiny suit. "He'll look so handsome." Mr. Okoro laughed. "He's a baby, dear, not a businessman yet." They took turns feeding Donald, changing his diapers, and singing him to sleep. Even when he cried at night, they didn't mind. "I never knew I could love someone so much," Mrs. Okoro whispered one night as they watched Donald sleep. Mr. Okoro nodded, his eyes moist. "He's the son we've always wanted." As Donald grew, the mark on his forehead became less noticeable. The Okoros barely thought about where he came from anymore. To them, he was their son in every way that mattered. "We're finally a real family," Mrs. Okoro said, watching Donald take his first steps. Mr. Okoro hugged her. "Yes, we are, and nothing will ever change that." Back in Nneka's home village, her uncle was growing increasingly worried and angry. He paced back and forth in his compound, his face creased with concern. "Any news of Nneka?" he asked his wife for the 100th time. She shook her head sadly. "Nothing yet. It's been months now." The uncle slammed his fist against the wall. How could she just disappear like that? It doesn't make sense. He turned to the gatekeeper, who was standing nervously in the corner. You were supposed to be watching the compound. How did she leave without you noticing?" The gatekeeper stuttered. I don't know, sir. I didn't see anything." The uncle's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You've been acting strange ever since Nneka disappeared. What are you hiding?" "Nothing, sir." I swear, the gatekeeper protested, but his eyes couldn't meet his employer's gaze. Days passed, and the uncle's suspicion of the gatekeeper grew. One evening, he called the man to his office. "I've decided to let you go," the uncle said firmly. The gatekeeper's eyes widened in shock. "But sir, why? I've served you faithfully for years." "And yet, my niece disappeared under your watch," the uncle replied, his voice cold. "I can't trust you anymore. Pack your things and leave by morning." After the gatekeeper left, the uncle's wife entered the room. "Do you think that was wise?" she asked gently. "He's been with us for so long." The uncle sighed heavily. "I don't know what else to do. Nneka's disappearance is eating me up inside. I feel like I've failed her." "We all miss her," his wife said, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But blaming the gatekeeper won't bring her back." Little did they know that the gatekeeper's guilty conscience was eating him alive. As he packed his belongings, he muttered to himself, "I should tell them the truth, but they'll kill me if they find out what I did to Nneka." The next morning, as the gatekeeper left the compound for the last time, the uncle watched him go with a mix of anger and sadness. He had no idea that the man he was sending away was the very reason for Nneka's flight. "I'll find you," Nneka, the uncle vowed, looking out at the village. "Wherever you are, I'll bring you home." But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the uncle's search seemed hopeless. That night, Nneka tossed and turned on her thin mattress in the uncompleted building. The cold seeped through the walls, but her mind was too busy to notice. "What should I do?" she whispered to herself. Maybe I should go back to Uncle's house." But as soon as the thought crossed her mind, she shuddered. She imagined her uncle's angry face, his booming voice. "No, I can't," she muttered. "He'll be so mad. And what if? What if the gatekeeper is still there?" She rolled over, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Emeka, where are you? Mama misses you so much." Finally, exhaustion took over and Nneka fell into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of Emeka, of holding him in her arms again. When morning came, Nneka woke up with a start. The sun was barely up, but she felt different, stronger somehow. "I can't give up," she said firmly. "Emeka needs me. I have to find him." She got up, washed her face with some water from a bucket, and headed out. Her first stop was the house where she usually cleaned. The owner, Mrs. Adebayo, was surprised to see her so early. "Nneka, is everything okay?" Nneka nodded. "Yes, Ma, I need more work. Can I clean the whole house today?" Mrs. Adebayo looked at her closely. "Are you sure? You look tired?" "I'm fine," Nneka insisted. "Please, I need the money." As she scrubbed the floors and washed the windows, Nneka's mind raced. "I'll save every kobo," she thought. "Maybe I can hire someone to help find Emeka, or maybe." The work was hard, but it kept her hands busy and her mind focused. In the village where Donald lived with the Okoros, life was very different from his humble beginnings. The house was big and always full of nice things. Donald grew up happy, with lots of toys and books. One day, when Donald was about 7, he asked his mother, "Mama, why do I have this mark on my forehead?" Mrs. Okoro hesitated for a moment. "Well, darling, that's your special mark. It means you're destined for great things." Donald smiled, but he still felt curious. "But none of my friends have marks like this." "That's because you're special," Donald, his father, chimed in. "Now, go finish your homework." As Donald grew older, he became very smart. He was always top of his class, and his parents were very proud. "See," Mrs. Okoro would say, "we told you that mark meant something special." Meanwhile, in another part of the village, Nneka was still struggling. She had never stopped looking for Emeka, but she needed money to survive. One day, she met a young man named Yuchi at the market. He was looking for someone to help at his house. "My mother needs help with cleaning and cooking," Yuchi explained. "Are you interested?" Nneka nodded eagerly. "Yes, please. I need the work." Great, Yuch smiled. Come by tomorrow morning. It's the big yellow house near the church. Nneka never knew she was about to meet the woman who took her child away. Nneka felt a glimmer of hope. She would find Emeka, no matter what it took. On her first day of work, Nneka walked up to the big house, feeling nervous but hopeful. She knocked on the door, and Yuch answered. Good morning, Nneka, he said. Come in. Mama isn't feeling well today, so you'll need to help take care of her too. Nneka nodded. Of course, I'll do my best. As they entered Mama Yuchi's bedroom, Nneka saw the older woman lying in bed. She looked pale and weak. Mama Yuchi's eyes met Nneka's, and suddenly she froze. A strange look passed over her face. Mama, this is Nneka, the new help, Yuch said. Mama Yuch blinked, then nodded slowly. Yes, welcome, Nneka. Nneka smiled politely. Thank you, May. I hope you feel better soon. As Nneka started cleaning the room, Mama Yuch watched her closely. She couldn't shake the feeling that she knew this girl from somewhere. Throughout the day, Nneka worked hard. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, and checked on Mama Yuch regularly. Do you need anything? Nneka would ask gently. Mama Yuch would shake her head, but her eyes followed Nneka's every move. By evening, Mama Yuch was feeling worse. As Nneka brought her some soup, the older woman suddenly grabbed her hand. You remind me of someone, Mama Yuch said, her voice weak. Nneka looked surprised. I do. Who, May? Mama Yuch shook her head. Never mind. It's nothing. But as days passed, Mama Yuch's guilt grew stronger. She saw how kind and hard-working Nneka was. One afternoon, as Nneka was fluffing her pillows, Mama Yuch spoke up. Nneka, tell me about yourself. Where are you from? Nneka hesitated, then said softly, I'm not from here, Ma. I came from another village some years ago. Why did you leave? Mama Yuch pressed. Nneka's eyes filled with tears. I lost my baby, Ma. Someone took him. I've been looking for him ever since. Mama Yuch felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She remembered the day she took a baby from an uncompleted building years ago. Could it be? Mama Yuch closed her eyes, feeling sick with guilt. She knew she had to tell the truth, but she was scared. What would happen to Donald? To her. But as she looked at Nneka's sad face, she knew she couldn't keep the secret any longer. One evening, as the sun was setting, Mama Yuch called out weakly, Nneka, please come here. Nneka hurried to Mama Yuch's bedside. Yes, Mama Yuch? Do you need something? Mama Yuch's eyes were full of sadness. She took a shaky breath and said, Nneka, I have something very important to tell you. Please sit down. Nneka sat on the edge of the bed, feeling worried. What is it, Mama Yuch? Mama Yuch's hands were shaking as she spoke. Nneka, many years ago, I did something terrible. I took something very precious from you. Nneka's heart started beating faster. What do you mean? What did you take? Tears started rolling down Mama Yuchi's cheeks. I took your baby, Nneka. The one with the mark on his forehead. I sold him to a family who couldn't have children of their own. Nneka jumped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? You? You took my Emeka, her voice was shaking. Mama Yuch nodded, looking down at her hands. Yes, I'm so sorry, Nneka. I thought I was helping the other family, but I see now how much pain I caused you. Nneka felt like the room was spinning. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself. Where is he? Where's my baby? He's with the Okoro family, Mama Yuch said softly. They named him Donald. He's grown now, almost a young man. Nneka's legs felt weak. She sat back down heavily. Donald? My Emeka is? Donald? Mama Yuch reached out and took Nneka's hand. I know this is a shock, but I have to make this right. We need to tell the Okoros the truth. Nneka pulled her hand away, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this? Do you know how long I've been searching for him, how much I've suffered? I'm sorry, Nneka. I truly am, Mama Yuch said, her voice filled with regret. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want to help make things right. Nneka stood up, her emotions swirling between joy at finding her son and anger at Mama Yuch. I need some air. This is too much. As she walked out of the room, Nneka's mind was racing. Her Emeka was alive, and so close all this time. But he had another family now, another name. What would happen when he found out the truth? Mama Yuch called after her. Nneka, please. We need to talk about what to do next. But Nneka couldn't think straight. She needed time to process this life-changing news. As she stepped outside, she looked up at the stars, wondering if her son was looking at the same sky. unaware that his whole world was about to change. Just as Nneka was about to leave the room, Yuch walked in. He looked at his mother's tearful face, then at Nneka's shocked expression. "What's happening here?" Yuch asked, his voice filled with concern. "Mama, are you okay?" Mama Yuch wiped her eyes and tried to sit up straighter. "Yuch, my son, I need your help. We have to go to the Okoro's house right away." Ushi looked confused. "The Okoros? Why? What's so urgent?" Mama Yuch glanced at Nneka, then back to her son. "It's time to tell the truth, Yuch, about Donald." Uch's eyes widened. "Donald? What about him?" Nneka couldn't hold back anymore. "He's my son," she blurted out. "Your mother took him from me years ago." Uch stumbled back, shocked. "What? Mama, is this true?" Mama Yuch nodded sadly. "Yes, it's true. I made a terrible mistake, and now we need to make it right." Uch ran his hands through his hair, trying to process this information. "I can't believe this. All these years." "Please, Yuch," Mama Yuch pleaded. "We need to go to the Okoros. They need to know the truth, and so does Donald." Yuch nodded slowly. "All right, I'll take you there. But Mama, are you sure you're strong enough?" "I have to be," Mama Yuch said firmly. "This can't wait any longer." As they prepared to leave, Nneka felt like her heart might burst out of her chest. She paced back and forth, unable to keep still. "What if they don't believe us?" she asked nervously. "What if Donald hates me?" Yuch put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll face whatever happens together. The truth needs to come out." They helped Mama Yuch into Yuchi's car. As they drove through the village, Nneka stared out the window, her mind racing. "Is this really happening?" she thought. "After all these years, am I finally going to see my Emeka?" The car ride felt both too long and too short. When they finally pulled up in front of the Okoro's large house, Nneka felt like she might faint. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Mama Yuch reached out and took her hand. "You can, Nneka. You've been strong for so long. Just a little bit longer." Yuch helped his mother out of the car, while Nneka stood frozen, staring at the house. "Are you ready?" Yuch asked gently. Nneka took a deep breath and nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." As they walked to the front door, Nneka's legs felt like jelly. This was the moment she had dreamed of for years, but now that it was here, she was terrified. As they approached the grand house of Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, Nneka felt a mix of nervousness and hope. The large, beautiful home made her think about the good life her son must have had. Mama Yuch walked in front, with Nneka close behind. Each step they took made Nneka's heart beat faster. When they got to the front door, Mama Yuch knocked. Mr. and Mrs. Okoro opened the door, looking surprised to see them. Mama Yuch started talking, her voice shaky. "Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, I need to tell you something important," Mama Yuch said. "It's about Donald." Mr. Okoro's face turned serious. "What about Donald?" he asked. Mama Yuch took a deep breath. "The truth is, Donald isn't. He isn't really your son. I'm so sorry for what I did." Mrs. Okoro's eyes widened. "What do you mean? How can that be?" Mama Yuch pointed to Nneka. "This is Nneka. She's Donald's real mother." Mr. Okoro looked at Nneka, then back at Mama Yuch. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice firm but not angry. Mama Yuch nodded, crying. "Yes, it's all true. I took Donald from Nneka when he was a baby." Mrs. Okoro put her hand over her mouth, shocked. "Donald? Our Donald?" Nneka stood there, not knowing what to say. She watched Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, wondering if they would be angry or if they might let her be part of Donald's life. Suddenly, they heard the door open behind them. A young man walked in, looking confused. He had a clear mark on his forehead. It was Donald, now all grown up. He looked at Nneka, and for a moment, nobody moved or said anything. Donald spoke first. "Mom, Dad, who are these people?" he asked. The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was a big moment. What would happen next? How would Donald react to the truth? The tension in the room was so strong you could almost touch it. Thanks for watching. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more stories.